take and I talk about all things witchy, craft related, law of attraction, manifesting, esoteric, and everything else in between. And I'm going to continue in my series that I made a series on basically deconstructing your spirituality, essentially. For me, deconstructing would be removing the doctrines, the dogma that I was literally indoctrinated with. I'm using words not to offend, but that's really what it was. I didn't choose that path. I was influenced and indoctrinated from being a child. And I continue to seek answers, which is what I want to get into with this particular video. So during my journey, my spiritual journey, it became very important for me to educate myself because I've been taught, that's something I've been taught as well, to understand something, to not be afraid of something. Stick with me on this fear thing. To not be afraid of something is to understand something, to learn about it, because once you understand it, maybe you won't be afraid, because now there's an understanding. So basically all you pull open the doors to the dark shadows, to the things, the skeleton in the closet, so to speak. I don't know where I'm going with this part, but anyway, and by the way, notice my tone, notice how jovial I am, notice how joy-filled I am. And I'm not coming from a negative point of view. I don't hate Christianity. I don't really hate much of anything, but I don't hate Christianity. I don't hate Christians. I don't hate anyone who follows. But what it was during my journey, it was important for me to understand, full stop, understand, because I realized a lot of things were being said to me. So I wanted to go on a fact-finding mission. It also helped years later that I would go back into college, because I had stopped college once I had my daughter. But I would go back to college and I would take a course on world religions. And that definitely helped fill in some gaps. Just from a non-biased point of view, it opened the world up to me, literally. But I had to get to the point where I would be willing to have the world opened up and receive that in not a defensive, fearful way that I was taught as a Christian. So without further ado, I'm going to basically go over, and in the description, I'll have links to, so you can see this information with your own eyes, as well, from reliable sources, but in their online resources. I can get further into the idea about books and stuff like that, but right now I'm just going to make it simple. The first part of the education was fully embracing the concept of the Bible, where it came from, who wrote the Bible. I'm going to get into the breakdown about that and what I learned, and that information influenced me as well. My changing beliefs once I understood the facts, the historical facts about the Bible. After that, because of that, then I started, the concept of Jesus and so forth, and the resurrection, which was pivotal in my teachings of Christianity coming up. I was repeatedly told about Jesus dying for my sins. Even then, I kept saying, but I don't have any sin. What sins? I was just born. Well, we'll talk about that. The whole ideology about being born into sin and this Jesus figure. Once I became educated on that changed, well, literally everything as well, on how I was able to move forward. The idea of the great law code of Moses, I would learn where that came from as well. That predates the idea and all the description of everything about Moses and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, just a little snippet about the whole Ethiopian being the birthplace of Christianity, or at least the oldest Bible was written there. Dispelled that as well. That helped. I knew because of history in general about Constantine on Christianity, but to what end? Well, once I learned about that, that helped with deconstructing even more so. So yeah, and then I'll wrap it up in the end. So we're just going to get into some interesting imagery that I've collected, and I have compiled this information, and I'm going to go ahead and get into those very facts. And my intention is that it helped me. Sometimes just knowing the facts can help you expand. So let's get into the facts. So we start with the Old Testament, the single author theory. The Old Testament, or Hebrew Bible, narrates the history of the people of Israel over about a millennium, beginning with God's creation of the world and humankind, and contains the stories, laws, and moral lessons that form the basis of religious life for both Jews and Christians. For at least 1,000 years, both Jewish and Christian tradition held that a single author wrote the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which together are known as the Torah, or Hebrew. That's Hebrew for instruction. The single author was believed to be Moses, the Hebrew prophet who led the Israelites out of captivity in Egypt and guided them across the Red Sea toward the Promised Land. Yet nearly from the beginning, readers of the Bible observed that there were things in the so-called 5 books of Moses that Moses himself could not possibly have witnessed. His own death, for example, occurs near the end of Deuteronomy. A volume of the Talmud, or Talmud, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, so stick with me, Talmud, the collection of Jewish laws recorded between the 3rd and 5th centuries AD, dealt with this inconsistency by explaining that Joshua, Moses' successor or leader of the Israelites, likely wrote the verses about Moses' death. So by the time the Enlightenment began in the 17th century, most religious scholars were more seriously questioning the idea of Moses' authorship, as well as the idea that the Bible could possibly have been the work of any single author. Those first 5 books were filled with contradictory, repetitive material and often seemed to tell different versions of the Israelite story, even within a single section of text. Just as Old Testament chronicles the story of the Israelites in the millennium or so leading up to the birth of Jesus Christ, the New Testament records Jesus' life from his birth and teachings to his death and later resurrection, a narrative that forms the fundamental basis of Christianity. Beginning around 70 AD, about 4 decades after Jesus' crucifixion, according to the Bible, 4 anonymously written chronicles of his life emerged that would become central documents in the Christian faith. Named for Jesus' most devoted earthly disciples or apostles, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So the 4 canonical Gospels were traditionally thought to be eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. But for more than a century, scholars have generally agreed that the Gospels, like many of the books of the New Testament, were not actually written by the people to whom they are attributed. In fact, it seems clear that the stories that form the basis of Christianity were first communicated orally and passed down from generation to generation before they were collected and written down. Traditionally, 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament were attributed to Paul the Apostle, who famously converted to Christianity after meeting Jesus on the road to Damascus and wrote a series of letters that helped spread the faith throughout the Mediterranean world. But scholars now agree on the authenticity of only 7 of Paul's epistles: Romans, 1 and 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, and Philemon. These are believed to have been written between AD 50 to 60, making them the earliest known evidence for Christianity. Authors of the later epistles may have been followers of Paul who used his name to lend authenticity to the works. By the 4th century AD, Christianity had been established as the dominant religion in the Western world. and the New and Old Testaments as its most sacred texts. In the centuries to come, the Bible would only become more central to the lives and faiths of millions of people around the world, despite the mystery surrounding its origins and the ongoing complex debate over its authorship. So that's the Bible. So we're going to talk a little bit about Paul the Apostle. So between 42 to 62 CE, Paul the Apostle traveled throughout the Mediterranean on his evangelical missions, preaching the new religion of the risen Christ. The Bible itself, in the book of Acts and 1 Peter, allude to the possibility, explored in depth in the late 19th and earliest 20th century CE, that Paul's version of Christianity was different from the message preached by Jesus of Nazareth. Paul, formerly Saul of Tarsus, was a Jewish Pharisee of Tarsus, that's in modern-day Turkey, who claimed to have received a vision from God which convinced him of the reality of Jesus Christ as the risen Son of the Creator of the universe, sent to earth to die for the sins of man. While many have since considered this a miraculous occurrence which displays God's love for humanity through the sacrifice of his Son, the concept of the dying and reviving God figure was well known in Paul's time, and it is probable that beliefs such as the cult of Isis informed the basis of Paul's religious views. Isis resurrecting Osiris, let's get into that. Set was jealous of his brother's power and prestige, however, and so conceived a plan to get rid of him. He had a beautiful coffin made to Osiris's exact height, and then threw a grand party where he presented this box and told the guests that whichever of them fit in it most perfectly could have it as a gift. When Osiris lay down in the coffin, Set slammed the lid on him, fastened it shut, and threw it in the Nile, where it was carried away toward the sea. Isis was distraught when she found her husband was missing and went searching for him all through Egypt without success. Osiris, meanwhile, had traveled out to sea, and eventually his coffin became lodged in a great tamarisk tree growing near Byblos in Phoenicia. The tree grew quickly around the coffin until it completely contained it. Isis cut Osiris from the tree, carried his body back to Egypt, where she hid him from Set in the swampy region of the Nile Delta. She left him to go gather herbs to make a potion to return him to life, leaving her sister to guard the body. While she was gone, Set learned of his brother's return and went out to find his body. He managed to get Isis's sister to tell him where it was, and when he found it, he hacked it into pieces, scattered across the land and into the Nile. So Isis still was able to revive Osiris, and once he was alive, she assumed the form of a kite, flew around him, drew the seed from his body into her own, and became pregnant with a son, Horus, thereby becoming a virgin mother, by the way. Even though Osiris now lived, he was incomplete and could no longer rule the land of the living. He withdrew into the afterlife, where he became Lord and the judge of the dead. So that was a familiar tale, a familiar story, I should say, in Paul's time. Okay? So let's get into the biblical understanding in 19th century CE archaeology, because this is going to matter. The stories which the Bible relates were considered to be historically accurate and entirely unique until the mid-19th century CE, when archaeologists discovered the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. The Bible, in fact, was considered the oldest book in the world until much older literature was discovered, which told the same stories in an earlier form than those found in the Bible. So scholars had long known that the Bible was a compilation which had been gathered from earlier works and authorized under the bishops of Rome, but no one seemed to be aware that those works were drawn from even earlier pieces. No one could read Egyptian hieroglyphics until I believe it's his John Jacques Champollion, hoping I'm saying that correctly. He was born from 1790 to 1832 CE. He deciphered them, and the literature of the Sumer was completely unknown to the modern world. In the mid-19th century CE, museums and publications sent archaeologists from the west to the region of Mesopotamia to find physical evidence that would substantiate biblical narratives. The 19th century CE was an interesting period for religion in the West, especially Christianity, and that people became more vocal in their criticism of the faith, and new ideas and philosophies provided for acceptable alternatives to religious belief. What they found instead was the ancient civilization of Mesopotamia and the rich literature heritage which had been buried under the sands for centuries. Iconic stories such as the fall of man and the great flood they found were not unique to the Bible at all, but had already been written down centuries before the Hebrew scribes revised them in their own work. The great law code of Moses, thought to be the first history, was discovered to have had a predecessor in the law code of Ur-Nammu and the more famous code of Hammurabi. So the Code of Hammurabi was a set of 282 laws inscribed in stone by the Babylonian king Hammurabi, who conquered and then ruled ancient Mesopotamia. Excavations in Egypt, meanwhile, found no evidence for the story of the enslavement of the Hebrews under the Pharaoh of Egypt, nor any other details found in the book of Exodus. Once ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics were able to be read, the myths of Egypt were found to have similarities to the Christian figure of the dying and reviving God in Mary and Mother of Jesus, that have taken on many of the attributes and epithets of the Egyptian goddess Isis. All right, so let's get into, just briefly, I'm going to just read something to you, and I think it's important. Christianity was introduced to Ethiopia in the 4th century. I'm going to repeat that sentence. Christianity was introduced to Ethiopia in the 4th century. Islam was introduced in the 7th century and is now actually practiced by about 1/3 of Ethiopians. Okay? There's a lot of confusion and misinformation about that. And this is facts and proof of history. We can prove this. I'm not just saying this. It didn't start in Ethiopia, Christianity, that is. So in the early stages of the development of their faith, Christians did something rare, if not unique, in the history of religion. They adopted the entire scriptural canon of what they now saw to be another faith, Judaism, and embraced the Hebrew scriptures, which they called the Old Testament. But while doing so, they also incorporated the insistent monotheism of Judaism as part of the essence of their truth and the way of salvation, just as they incorporated the Hebrew scripture story as part of their own identity-giving narrative and experience. At its most basic, Christianity is the faith tradition that focuses on the figure Jesus Christ. This narrowing of focus on Jesus Christ as truth meant also a complementary sharpening of focus on the way of salvation. There is no purpose in saving someone who does not need salvation. Christianity, therefore, began to make, through its councils and creeds, theologians, and scholars, some attempts at definitive descriptions of what it is to be human. Later, some of these descriptions were called original sin. The idea that all humans inherited from Adam, the first created human, a condition that made it impossible for them to be perfect or to please a personal God on their own. While Christians never agreed on a specific teaching on original sin, they did describe as the essence of Christianity the fact that something limited humans and led them to need redemption. Yet the concentration always returned to Jesus Christ as belonging more to the essence of Christianity than did any statements about the human condition. While Jesus lived among his disciples and those who ignored or rejected him, to make him the focus of faith or denial presented one type of issue. After the risen Jesus had become the ascended Lord and was no longer a visible physical presence, those at the head of the tradition had a different problem. Jesus remained a present reality to them, and when they gathered to worship, they believed that he was in the midst of them. He was present in their minds and hearts, in the spoken word that testified to him, and also present in some form when they had their sacred meal and ingested bread and wine as his body and blood. They created a reality around this experience. If once Judaism was that reality, now Christianity resulted. So let's get into the impact of Constantine on Christianity. So Constantine I, aka Constantine the Great, was a Roman emperor from 306 to 337 CE. Realizing that the Roman Empire was too large for one man to adequately rule, Emperor Diocletian split the empire into two, creating a rule of four. While he ruled the east from Nicomedia as an Augustus, that's a role, with Galerius as his Caesar, Maximian and Constantius, the Pale, ruled the west. It was the son of Constantine, who would one day rise to defeat all challengers to the throne and reunite the split empire, moving the capital away from old Rome and build a new eastern capital, a capital that would one day bear his name, Constantinople. So, First Council of Nicaea, that was in 325. So the first ecumenical, that's a word, of the Christian church, meeting in ancient Nicaea, which is now, I think that's pronounced Izmit, Turkey. It was called by the Emperor Constantine I, an unbaptized person, by the way, who presided over the opening session and took part in the discussions. He hoped a general council of the church would solve the problem created in the Eastern Church by Arianism, a heresy first proposed by Arius of Alexandria that affirmed that Christ is not divine but a created being. Pope Sylvester I did not attend the council but was represented. The council condemned Arius and, with reluctance on the part of some, incorporated the non-scriptural word homoousios, that means of one substance, into a creed to signify the absolute equality of the Son with the Father. Okay? The emperor then exiled Arius, an act that, while manifesting a solidarity of church and state, underscored the importance of secular patronage in ecclesiastical affairs. So the council attempted but failed to establish a uniform date for Easter. It issued decrees on many other matters, including the proper method of consecrating bishops, a condemnation of lending money at interest by clerics, and a refusal to allow bishops, priests, and deacons to move from one church to another. It also confirmed the primacy of Alexandria and Jerusalem over other sees in their respective areas. Socrates, Scholasticus, a 5th century Byzantine historian, said that the council intended to make a canon enforcing celibacy of the clergy, but it failed to do so when some objected. Okay, so this is where we're going to stop right now with our facts. Okay, so what of all of this history, all of these facts that I've read out to you? I've compiled and I've read and I took from different sources. So what does it all mean? What did it mean hearing all this information? For me, one of the main things is it's better to have facts and historical accounts than to go blindly on faith. That's me. Specifically relating to a religion that's been politicized in the way that it has, and also has proven to be a culmination of conflict and hypocrisy. So knowing this level of history for me um, which I've pared down for this video, by the way, because there's a lot more, but I've pared down fair facts that I think we can agree on. So this shined the light for me again on that dark room of spider webs, and the hints of a boogeyman being in the corner somewhere. That level of ideology that had been taught to me, I was able to begin to dispel that. So first off, to sum everything up, it was men who wrote the Bible. It was men who wrote the Bible. Men. And not even the men who claim in the stories that said they wrote. We were able to show this. Um, Men wrote the Bible. It was men who decided on the concept as Jesus as Lord. These men got together and made that decision. It had been challenged, and it was basically more men decided against the other men who also were seen as important and knew they all had these positions to know things, these learned men of Christianity. Um, yeah, they made the decision. It was men who saw that Christianity would become more than a cult to further political power. That's Constantine, by the way. He was doing a unification effort. It is so much easier to unify when we have this one God trope. It really helps because we don't want people to gather under theirs because, well, their culture and what their beliefs are, because we know what that looks like from a political point of view. They might, I don't know, gain confidence and might fight back. And we know that we didn't want that. Not we, the Romans didn't want that. They were all about conquer, 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 and then assimilate, and you just become Roman, and that's it. So there had already been so many other things happen. Constantine wanted to make a solid situation of people, under his regime. It was men who continued to edit and translate the central tool of Christianity, the Bible. I didn't even get too much into that, but you can tell there's always been this conversation and with these learned men of the time and royal, men of the times to make edits and to change and remove and take out and do all these things. So what you're looking at in 2024 at the end of the day has been edited. And for me, coming from a place of this is supposed to be what I take literally, please understand a true believer, they don't like when you say, well, metaphor, it's a metaphor, that offends them as someone who was a true believer, because it's like, wait, what do you mean? The idea, first of all, critical thinking goes out the window. I was there. It goes out the window because you're just in this very attack mode. Like you're talking about everything that I believe and base my entire life on. Of course I'm offended. You're wrong. You're not hearing anything that's being said. You just know it sounds like an attack. Um, I used to be one of those people. So understanding all of how many men have had a hand in the central tool that I was being told to live my life, structure my entire life on, just didn't make sense to me as well. And once I started looking into that, I didn't need to go too far down the road. I had already read, I was someone who was part of a Bible school study group. I was the person along with someone else leading it. I was being mentored at the time. So I'm familiar with the Bible. I'm a little familiar. I've had my peepers on it and read through several pages at a time. And I was also a ferocious reader, and I was obsessed with certain books in the Bible because I was like, wait, this is going to happen? Like, I took it literal because I was told to. Understanding all of this level of history and understanding what has happened and what just facts and what it is help to also go back to that little girl who was freaked out by the stuff that she was reading, and also to the young woman who started living life a little bit more and already came into her own conflicts. And then I was able to decenter this major tool of Christianity out of my life and my spirituality. Um, the other thing I just want to say is I started to understand that there was never um anything that did not disprove other gods. If anything, if we're using the Bible as a template to know what is and what was as the definitive guide, there is mention of gods in this tool, by the way. So that also had my mind expanding to, wait, who are the other gods? um, there was and is a constant debate on the concept of the Holy Trinity. Jesus is more than a prophet, and the inconsistency of the books of the Bible, right? So, in some, this was helpful to me to understand that, wait a minute, I'm asking questions. People always ask questions. Um, and there's an internal confusion around the origination place of Christianity. At least, especially coming up as a kid, I was told, well, it all started in Africa, so this is really about us. This is what I was told. And that was something that I took, most of us, it wasn't just me, by the way, I wasn't alone. I was around other people, and they were Black, and we took pride in the idea that we were being told that all these things were happening in Africa. Um, I actually, that as I got older, I had more questions on that, but people can only answer questions that they know. If they're not thinking outside of, just those couple scriptures and what the minister or pastor is saying, that's as far as it goes for a lot of people because they're comfortable with that. That's an intentional thing. It's willful ignorance, by the way. It is willful because um, people are capable of these thoughts. A lot of them suppress it because they think that's just the devil. Facts, facts. Sadly, but facts. All right. I have my notes here because I'm trying to stay consistent on this because I really want to get my message across. But in my quest for historical facts, um, I would find that what was considered truth just, in fact, was not truth at all. I was left with answers to questions, like I said, that I had secretly held since I was a child. And so, with my answers now, I was able to finally release this indoctrination. Education elevated me to the point of expansion. I had a new lens to see the world. I was able to explore cultures across the world with objectivity. That would bode well for me at this stage of my life. um, and I'm going to be honest because I opened this up talking about I don't hate, and I do not. But I will admit I've struggled with sharing this new information. So over the years when I was finding out this information, because I wanted to understand, um, I wanted to share with the people I knew. I I tried to keep it simple, which is black and white, plain facts, right? That proved inconsistencies, and even the concept of which I didn't even get into here, the Bibles that a lot of people's great that's been kind of handed down in families may have, was it the actual Bible or was this the slave version of the Bible? Because that was the whole thing. Books printed intentionally had sections of the Bible removed because they didn't want the slaves to have that. Now, keep in mind, literacy is still an issue for most of us at this point. So when I say slaves reading it, because I think there's confusion about that too. Literacy, yes, there were some people who found a way and they figured out how to read, which is crazy accomplishment when I think about just what that took. But typically, the person who would have been reading, there might have been that on Sunday, that person that was picked to be the person to keep all of us together in that church. It was not about saving our souls because we were livestock. So it wasn't about saving souls per se. It was more to do with they needed to keep those people in one place so they can have Sunday, their day of rest, and that was a way to do so. So it was the church service. Um, and basically, the roles of the people who were in charge were basically babysitters. That's a thing. So understanding that everything changed from how I view the church services that I had been to my whole life, and why we did things a certain way and where did that come from. And it's a combination of a lot of different things, but um, yeah, that really mine really expanded with that. But the when I went to go try to explain these things, I was met with, you don't really know the word. That's your problem. You listening to atheists and non-believers. That's why you're confused. And the one that I think was frustrating is, all I know is God is real, Jesus is real, and the devil's a liar. And that pretty much wrapped up my conversations. I was younger then. I still actually cared a lot. Um, period. I said care. No, I care about things, but I to the level I when you're younger, it's like everything feels like it's the end of the world. You gotta listen. You have to get on this with me. Um, they in fact did not, but that's cool. They did not. Uh, I do want to tell you that I will separately discuss in another video. We're gonna start talking about this horned entity, this devil, because I had to contend with that. I've talked about it, but that's where that fear definitely comes in, and how I started divorcing these concepts of what I thought spirituality was, and then being left with understanding so much is already inside of me, and the external has been the spell. That's been the trick. It's been the trick from the beginning. And these historical figures I went over who existed, these, Constantine and the ones before, apparently there's, we know Constantine actually existed, but um, the you notice in these stories, and they're getting together and they're talking, at the Council of Nicaea, at other working, there were other councils, by the way. There were other, on a smaller scale of bishops and things like that who made decisions about the Bible and what might needed to be. Because even before King James, there were always this ongoing thing where these learned men got together and they would, come and tweak and do things. Um, Having that knowledge, I can't express enough, like, helped. But the biggest thing I started when I researched is, how come nobody's talking about the devil? I keep looking for these, theologians and these priests and all this, and I'm not seeing anything about this devil, the way that it was presented to me, um, that the devil is just as a big a deal as God is. Actually, it's like they're equal because I've been shown that. And then I was like, no, 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 it's not the same thing. It's more like an angel, a good angel, and then there's the devil. He's not on a level with God. Um, but if that's not the case, in the way that most religion is taught and practiced, um, at least where I'm from, the Northeast of the United States, and when you are in church, you start to go to other churches. You don't just go to one church, by the way. Um, just saying. So you kind of get to see how other people were doing church too, and how they're preaching. And I'm going to tell you, the devil is a big part of the storyline. It's a big part of the Sunday storyline. So to have that drilled in me so much, this devil figure. And then when I start going into historical facts on the what was supposedly happening in around these times, and then these bishops and things of that, never hearing them say the devil is was interesting to me. So I looked into that more. So I'll explain more about that. But do you hopefully understand how just having education on the subject can sort of clear things up? It brings a level of clarity to the situation. And I'll end it with this. Initially, I was angry. I was angry because everything I thought I knew, and I had spent most of my childhood into teenage years believing to be facts, truth. You can't separate this, was all a lie. It was all misconstrued. It was a lot of stuff just was given that was just repeated and said that was just flat out just wrong. It was just wrong. And that's why I wanted to save the people I know and tell them the truth. They don't want to hear it. That's okay. Um, but here we are now, and I've had different types of experiences that have happened to me by having an expansive mind on the idea of spirituality and deities and more than one existing, and dare I say it, a feminine counterpart within a deity. Your yin and yang, maybe not everything's male focused, and looking at other cultures, which, by the way, when I say cultures, because a lot of times in my studies, what I have found is that in other cultures, there is not religion per se, especially for indigenous cultures. It's just culture, it's how you live. And this is where people were, I was one of those people, got it really confused in my other video. Well, who do you worship then? Once you're out of this bubble of, you know, Judeo-Christian beliefs, that's not a question anymore in your mind, because the idea of worshiping doesn't really make any sense. It, it's not even a question anymore. It's basically just how you move, how a lot of us talk about how you live your life with intention, how you live your life with purpose. That is the quote unquote religion. That's the basis right there. Morality. How do you set your morals? We can come together as a community and share values and what we define as our morality as community. It's not until we get into, even through human history, until these, like the European range, until they come into play, where it's, they just don't want to accept that and live that way. And you know, they went around, warred, colonized. Um, you know, the idea of Rome. I just want to say this: the whole when in Rome, that has everything to do with, like, you know, do as the Romans do. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? And I would say things like that, not really fully comprehending the understanding. Because when Rome conquered you, you were Roman. It's like, oh no, my people, we have that. No, you're Roman. You are Roman now. That's the end of the story. You will do as the Romans do. So it's like, no, but there's no buts. And we're going to put somebody here to make sure you know you're Roman. That's the end of the story. You're whatever, whoever you think you originated from, whatever. No, you're Roman now. Period. So, yeah, that the people behind that mindset are responsible for taking more of a cult and turning it to this mainstream thing, and ushering in what we see it as today. And understanding that um, has forever altered my mind and my ideas of Christianity. And yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Thanks again for watching. I do appreciate you all. If you stuck it out this far, let me know in the comments if you have any other questions. And go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe, share. And also go to leaptaken.com, check out the services that I offer there. And as always, thanks for watching. Oh, and hit the join button to support the channel here. It's like a Patreon here on YouTube. I would greatly appreciate it. All right, thanks again. Bye.